How do you solve a quadratic equation by factoring? We will answer this question by the end of the video. What you will need to use. These are the steps to solve a quadratic equation by factoring. So we're going to go ahead and label this as steps. The first step is you're going to use the X method or the big X method. So I just want to remind you that if A is equal to 1, you'll use the X method and B will go up top. Your C term goes in the bottom and then you look for your two factors. And if A is greater than 1, you'll use the big X method, and for the big X, B goes up top, but AC goes in the bottom. We have our two factors, and remember we're supposed to divide them by A and then put them in the factored form. But let's say that you have, once you finish your polynomial by factoring, you'll have an answer, and let's give you an example. It could be X plus 5 times X minus 9. And this is going to be set equal to 0 because the quadratic equation will be in standard form. Well, now you're going to use ZPP and you're going to take one equation and set that equal to 0. Take another equation and set that equal to 0. And then you're going to solve each equation to come up with your 2 or 1 or no solutions. Remember, you can have 3 possibilities. And on the next slide, we'll talk about your solutions for a parabola. For this section, we are now solving parabolas using a different method. We're going to solve by factoring. But I still want you to remember and recall the solutions to a parabola and by looking at a graph. So let's take a look at a graph here of a quadratic equation. And I want you to remember that the solutions are the zeros to the function. So here and here. And let's give them numbers just for us to have a concrete example. We could call this negative 10, and this could be positive 10 here. So if those are our solutions, then our final answer for this parabola would be negative 10, 0 as one solution, and our second solution is 10, 0. For all examples and for all problems when solving a quadratic, this is how you need to represent your solutions. And we'll be doing that on the next couple of examples. Okay, here's our first example. We're going to solve the quadratic equation by factoring, and then I will help you check your answer for this example. So remember, the first step is to factor the trinomial. And just a side note, and I'll go ahead and write it in red, you want to make sure that this is in standard form. And remember, standard form means everything is set equal to 0. So set equal to 0. And if it's not, you need to get it that way. You need to make sure that it always is set equal to 0. I hope you could read that in red. So now let's go ahead and use the X method. I have negative 6 on top, positive 8 on the bottom. Two factors that work is negative 2 and negative 4. So I factor my trinomial and I get X minus 2 multiplied by X minus 4. And remember, this is all set equal to 0. And now we're going to use the zero product property, and we're going to set X minus 2 equal to 0 and X minus 4 equal to 0 and solve each equation. This equation I would get X equals 2, and for this equation I would get X equals 4. And like I explained before, you want to have your answers in coordinate points. So our solution is going to be 2, 0 and 4, 0. Let me go ahead and box that. And now let's go ahead and check our answer. To check our answer, we are going to plug in the number 2, and we should get 0, and you can plug in the number 4, and you should also get 0. So let's see if we get that. Oops. I'm going to erase that. And I want to go ahead and move up my slide so I have more room. There we go. So now let's go ahead and check our answer. We're going to plug in 2 and for each x, and we should get it, the quadratic equation equal to 0. So we plug in 2, and I get 2 squared minus 6 multiplied by 2 plus 8. I get 4 minus 12 plus 8. Negative 8 plus 8 is going to equal 0. So that checks off for our first solution. I'll put a check there. And now let's check our second solution. 4 squared minus 6 times 4 plus 8. I get 16 minus 24 plus 8, which gives us negative 8 plus 8. and that also equals 0. So that checks off as well. So there you notice that we have our two solutions and we solve the quadratic equation. Okay, for this example, we're going to solve the quadratic equation by factoring, but I would like you to check your own answers. So I'm not going to check it this time, but you can do that. And if you forgot how to check, you can just rewind the video and rewatch me check the previous example. So remember, I told you that it needs to be set equal to 0, and you notice that it's not, this quadratic is not set equal to 0, it's set equal to 21. So all you have to do is get rid of the 21, and then it will be set equal to 0. So I'm going to minus 21 to both sides. And now my quadratic is x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. And now it's in standard form and it's ready for me to factor. So I'm going to use the x method. 4 up top, negative 21 on the bottom. And two numbers that would work would be 7 and 3. And the 3 needs to be negative since I want positive 4 as my outcome when I add the two factors together. And my two binomials are x plus 7 and x minus 3. Now I'll set those equal to 0, and I'm going to go ahead and use the zero product property now. And I get x plus 7 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0. Gotta love ZPP. I love it. And then I solve each equation, so you get x equals negative 7 and x equals positive 3. So my solutions are negative 7, 0 and 3, 0. And I want to refresh your memory on what this looks like on a graph. That means that the parabola is going to cross the x-axis at 3 for x and at negative 7 for x. So those are my two solutions. So your parabola could look something like this. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's what we're solving for. Or it could turn this way. I just realized that it can't go downwards because a is positive number, right? A is not negative, so it should be going upwards. So I have to explain, you guys, I was just recording the slide and then Charles walked in and it totally messed me up, so I'm restarting it. So I want to do an example where we work backwards because I know how comfortable you are with factoring and I feel that the examples were quite simple. So let's try something a little bit more creative. We're going to need to create a quadratic equation given the following solution. So they gave us the answer and now we need to come up with the quadratic equation. Remember that if we're working backwards, so look at the previous example. Our next step would put these into binomials. So we would have x plus 2 because if we set that equal to 0 and we solved, we would have got x equals negative 2. So we want x plus 2. And then this is also going to be multiplied by, and if you had x minus 5 set equal to 0 and solved it, you would get x equals positive 5, just like you want here. So we are going to make it multiplied by x minus 5. But this is not a quadratic, it's just two binomials being multiplied to each other. So we'll have to use foiling of the box method to get our quadratic. So we get x times x, which was x squared. X times negative 5 is negative 5x. 2 times x is plus 2x, and 2 multiplied by negative 5 is negative 10. And then we will combine the two middle like terms, and our final quadratic would be x squared minus 3x minus 10. And this would have been the original quadratic equation given to us to get the two answers as x equals negative 2 and x equals 5. Try to make up your own example this way by working backwards, and if you submit it to me in class, I will give you some extra credit points.